Hello, 10th grade biology students. Welcome to Introduction to Genetics. This is Mr. Kolka. Although you may not be in my class, maybe in another class, the information will still all be the same. So let's get started. Okay, first, genetics is the scientific study of heredity. Remember, heredity is things being passed down from parent to offspring. It includes lots of different traits, hair color, eye color, stuff like that. Heredity, the passing of traits from parents to offspring, like I said, will be documented throughout this unit of genetics. We'll tell you how we do it. Here is some information to review. Don't forget that all cells contain chromosomes that are made up of DNA. What's DNA stand for? That's right, deoxyribonucleic acid. These chromosomes are halved during meiosis, then passed on to the offspring. Remember that numbers you need to remember are diploid and haploid. Diploid meaning di, meaning double the amount, and haploid meaning half. So meiosis cells have half or haploid cells. Since chromosomes carry the information for traits, traits are therefore passed on to the offspring. If that's cut off at the bottom, that's what those last two words are, is the offspring. So how do we know so much about genetics? One man and one man only, Gregor Mendel. He's the father of genetics. Here he is, strikingly handsome. He's an Austrian monk, known as the father of genetics, like I said. Worked with pea plants in the 1860s, and he crossed pea plants and observed their outcomes, meaning he observed all their traits and characteristics. So why did he choose pea plants? Well, the structure of flowers are easy to work with. I'll show you here that the diagram on the side shows you that flowers have both male and female reproductive parts. And you'll see that the stamen, which has men in it, which is how you can remember it, has the anther and filament, which are the male reproductive parts. And the pistil, which is the female parts, have the sticky stigma here, the style, and the ovary. All right, these things are the female reproductive parts, which means you can self-pollinate a plant. You don't need anybody else to do it. You don't need the insects to come in. A person can do it themselves. There are the presence of distinct traits, only 2 varieties of each trait, which makes it easy to chart and document which ones they are, and a rapid reproductive cycle. If you were to try this with humans, you'd have to wait 40 weeks for a full-term pregnancy. These reproduce very quickly. And because of how quickly they reproduce, you'll see that new generations are produced often, so we can chart many, many offspring during this time. So what is a trait? A trait is a characteristic that can be passed from a parent to offspring. Coded for by a gene. Here are some examples for you. Hair color, eye color, height, blood type. Some type of behavior has been linked to genetic outcomes. So what did he see? Mendel observed 7 characteristics of pea plants, each occurring in 2 distinct forms. There is no intermediate or blended traits. A lot of people think that when you have 2 colors of flowers and you blend them together or you cross them, you're going to get a blended or mix of colors. That's not always the trait, but that's not always the idea, but we'll talk about it later. You will notice that a characteristic example would be seed shape, the actual shape of the seed. Okay, well, here are 2 key terms when you talk about inheritance and genetics. One is called purebred. That is, the organisms receive the same allele from both parents for a specific trait. You will notice that there are 2 large T's here or 2 small T's here. All right, they are homozygous, meaning same. The hybrid organisms receive 2 different alleles, one from each parent for a specific trait. An example would be 1 big T and 1 small t. These would be heterozygous, or a mix of traits. Here you will see the 7 characteristics of pea plants studied by Mr. Mendel. Flower color, flower position, seed color, seed shape, pod color, and stem length. That brings us to the experiment itself. Mendel started out with 2 purebred parents. You'll see they're called the pea generation, purple flowers and white flowers. 1 purebred for purple flowers, the other pure for white flowers. These are the P, and the P stands for parent generation. All plants in the first generation of offspring had purple flowers. Check it out. So right away he's thinking, oh man, all right, what's going on here? No white at all. These plants were the F1, or first filial generation. The white trait seemed to disappear. You can imagine how weird that must have been for Mr. Mendel. F1 generation self-fertilized and produced the F2 generation. About 75% of the F2 generation had purple, and 25 had white. Where'd it come from? So, Mendel hypothesized that something within the pea plant controlled the traits he observed. He called these controls factors. There must be more than one form of each factor. Individuals have 2 factors for each trait. Since all F1s were tall, some factors must be dominant to cover up the traits. We now call these factors alleles. There are 2 types of alleles, a dominant allele and a recessive allele. Those are very important terms that you're going to have to understand. Okay, the dominant allele is just that, dominant. The dominant form of the allele represented by a capital letter. So you can always think about capital, big letters over the small letters. Expressed when present, and it may mask the recessive, meaning if you see a big letter, that trait is going to be the one that you see. Recessive alleles form of an allele that is expressed in the absence of a dominant allele, represented by a lowercase letter. In this example, lowercase t. It does not appear when a dominant allele is present. So anytime a big letter is around, you do not see the little letters trait. For example, if we were talking about being tall, being dominant, and there was a little guy around, you would not see that person being short if the big letter was around. And that'll bring us to Mendel's laws, the law of segregation. Gene pairs, alleles, separate when gametes form during meiosis. 2 alleles for a trait split, and 1 allele goes to each new cell. This occurs during anaphase 1 when homologs split. Law 2, the law of independent assortment. Gene pairs are passed into gametes randomly and independently of one another. Traits are inherited independently of one another, which means they don't always travel together. The law of dominance. The dominant allele is expressed and the recessive allele may be hidden. That's what we talked about earlier with the big letters. When is the dominant allele expressed? Whenever it is present. Dominant. Which genotype demonstrates this law? Heterozygous. Remember, one big, one small, you will always see the big trait, whatever it stands for. And here he is, close up of this handsome devil. Take a look here. If I turn to the side, we have strikingly similar hairlines. See that? Could be related. I hope you enjoyed the introduction lesson to genetics. A lot more to come, including practice problems and vocabulary. Take care. Miss you all.